time. Good evening, everyone. As the chair of the class size committee and the first vice president of District 28's Community Education Council and D75 representative, I want to welcome you to our second class size committee meeting. This meeting marks the beginning of a journey to implement the new class size law, and our goal is to make this space one of respect, understanding, unity, and most of all, importantly, solutions. We may not have all the answers right now, but we are committed to finding those who do and holding them accountable. Remember, this is not about us versus them. This is about all of us working together for our children's future. Every voice in this room matters. Tonight, we're going to focus solely on class size, not on school lunch, PTA dues, or any unrelated issues. This is about understanding the direct impact of this law on our students, teachers, and on our community. It is about navigating the complexities of implementation and finding the best path forward. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Our work here is to ensure that that weapon is sharp, accessible, and effective for every child. Together, we will explore the effects of this law and push for the necessary changes. Let's make this an open forum for ideas, concerns, and constructive dialogue. And same house rules, always be respectful in the chat when speaking. Let's keep this a space for positive and constructive discussion. Please put all questions in the chat, and we're going to address them in the order that they're received during our Q&A segment. And we're not doing a raise hand. And please stay on topic with your questions. Remember, this is about class size and class size only. And other than that, thank you for your cooperation and being here. And let's begin. Let's continue this journey with open minds and a shared commitment to creating classrooms that work for everyone. And I guess next, we're going to do a little recap. So that would be agenda. Yep.
Sorry to jump in, Quentin. Thank you so much for your warm welcome. I would like to let the Spanish interpreters know to introduce themselves and also maybe put your number into the chat so that our Spanish-speaking parents can reach you.
Yes. Muy buenas noches. Hola, buenas noches. Este es un anuncio de interpretación en español. Por favor, si ustedes desean escuchar esta reunión en español, van a llamar al número 347-966-4114. Nuevamente, 347-966-4114. Seguido de la identificación de la conferencia, que es 230-522-193, seguido del signo numeral. Por favor, mantener los micrófonos en Zoom y en el teléfono silenciados para evitar interrupciones. Thank you. I'm done with the announcement. Thank you.
Lauren,
next
can
we
give
have,
you the...
yeah.
Okay, good.
Let's go, Lauren. She's next on our agenda.
Okay, I'll keep this brief because we have some exciting presenters this evening. My name is Lauren Clavin. I am one of the borough president appointees to CEC28. And here's how I know we're going to be successful. That is because we received over 50 responses from folks across the district who want to be on our committee. That's fantastic. That also means it's going to take us some time to go through all of the people who reached out wanting to join the committee. You should have received an email from me if you signed up by the deadline, which was September 30th. And we just ask that you answer a couple of questions so that we can make sure that we have representation across the entire district from caregivers, from other stakeholders like educators in our schools so that we make sure that all of our voices are being heard and represented in this conversation. I am going to put my email in the chat for anyone who who signed up filled out the form to be considered but did not receive an email from me. My email is going in the chat, and you can just reach out to me, and you will hear from me. We will be in touch and let everyone know when we've come up with the final list of our committee members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was really quick and to the point, and that was a great update. And next, we have an update from our amazing District 28 Superintendent's Office. We have our Chief of Staff, Vic Nareen, and we have Raj, which is our Special Instruction Liaison. Right? Yeah, I said that right. So yes, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and let us know what we need to know.
So I'll just say a quick good evening to everyone, and I'll defer this now to Raj.
So good evening, everyone. It's been a while since I've seen everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. So, with respect to class size, and what the district is doing, presently we're complying with all of the mandates that Central is providing us and the guidelines to ensure that we reduce our class size. So, this year the target for District 28 is a 3% reduction. And as of right now, so what I've been doing monthly is working with all of our leaders to capture what our target is. And as of right now, we are surpassing the 3% target. Now that is happening in different locations. When I say locations, I'm referring to different buildings as well as different grades, right? So right now, our target is looking at 56 classes and we're at 96. Now at the end of this month, I'm going to revisit those metrics with all of our schools because we're constantly enrolling students as well as capping some of our classes, right? And as of right now, the capping protocols are still the same. We do not have capping protocols for class size mandates, right? So for example, K1 and kindergarten is 20, right? The capping for kindergarten right now is not 20. It is its previous numbers. So we're following all the guidelines and protocols around enrollment and admissions and everything else. Nothing has changed. But our principals are working really strategically to find spaces within their buildings to see where they can reduce class size. And as of right now, we are surpassing the 3% target. I'm going, like, as I mentioned, I'm going to check in with all of our leaders as well as our district, personnel that's responsible for overflowing and capping and compliance to ensure that I get the right information so we can keep track of how we're reaching our targets, right? So as of right now, based on my understanding, because I'm copied on all messages going out around capping, that has not impacted very much where we are with our 3%. Now, I know the city has different metrics for where they want to be. That does not impact us. We are still at a 3% target, right? So next year they may say, listen, we're going to go to 20%, and that's going to change the dynamics, right? I think one of the things I would like to message to this team is that we have asked for an enrollment protocol, right? For District 28 specifically, just by nature of our district, we're just oddly designed, right? Because we go from north to south. And if we're capping let's say a high school, or not high school, I'm sorry, middle school, right? And we have space on the southern end, families are a little reluctant to travel that far, which is fair, right? So we're asking for, and Metro cards are available, all those things are transportation, but some families do not feel comfortable doing that, right? That said, we work with our families and we try to support them as best as possible, right? But we have asked for a protocol for admission specifically for 28. And we've been doing that for a while now. We were hoping to have that for this opening this school year. As of right now, that we have not received that. So we're operating under previous guidelines and protocols. That said, hopefully we can have some clarity around that for next year so that it would allow us to reduce a little bit, not much, because there's only so much we can do with that one item. We're also looking at how we can capitalize space in our buildings, right? And that's always something that we're looking at. So I'm working with Central to visit schools occasionally to see where we can find additional space, if possible, to start the process of reducing class size. But it's going to be, it's a bit of a challenge, as you know, particularly with our middle schools, right? And that's basically it, I think, for District 28. We're following all the protocols and guidelines. You know, Dr. Blake and our team are very transparent around where we are. And as of right now, I can certainly fill you in next month when you meet again, or maybe when I get some of the data from, I would say, the close of this week, to get a sense of where we are with our 3% target. But I don't anticipate that changing. So we're in a good space. I think the challenge, I think, for this team and for us as a community is to think about long term, right? Where are we going to place all of these children at some point? And now there are exemptions, and those things are in play at some point, I think. But there's a complicated procedure, and we do not have yet any guidance on that. But what we do know is that that's an opportunity that the Department of Ed will consider depending on the needs of the district. Okay, and that's essentially it. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
And if I can just add, I think we've had some fruitful discussions. We met with Kat, who's on here, and QBP's office, and having the support of everyone is going to be essential in making this successful. Taking into account the new New Yorkers, even though that is abated a little bit, it still affects us, right?
Yeah.
And we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And as you all know, in District 28 alone, we have, if my numbers are correct, Vic, and you can clarify for me, I think we have 35 shelters in our district.
Correct.
Which is, we welcome families into our district, but it makes things complicated though, right? If we're going to be fair and honest about the impact. So it's a bit of a challenge, particularly with a school like 50, which, you know, took on a lot of capacity at the onset when the New Yorkers were arriving in our District 28 sites. So it is challenging. Again, we have messaged that to our partners at Enrollment and Central. That makes it challenging. And we're not asking by any means so to have children or folks moved out of our district. We're just messaging to them the challenge, and we would like for us to start thinking about solutions.
What was that? The end of your presentation?
Sorry, Quentin, you're really broken up.
No, okay. Hold on. How about now?
Here you are. Here you are. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I was just wondering if they were still, did they have anything else they wanted to share? Or was that towards the end of their presentation? No, you can't even see me.
I'm sorry, Quentin, were you referring to District 28?
Yes, yes.
No, I think that's where we are at right now. We can certainly update as we progress towards the close of the school year and in preparation for next year. But we're always available to share with you where we are right now, particularly with class size. And as Bruce is, you know, we meet frequently, at least once a month. We check in on some of these items occasionally. We are true partners with all of our constituents and stakeholders. So I can keep you updated on this, but as of right now, as a district, the 3% target is being met and actually quite surpassed. So we're doing extremely well, and our leaders are amazing. And our principal Sirachi's on this call. they're all working really hard to address as best as they can, considering the conditions we're working under.
Thank you. We
Uh,
definitely appreciate all the work.
Quentin, I think you might be referring to some of the questions you sent.
Well, if you have
Yes.
answers to any of those questions,
So most of those are beyond the scope of what we can answer, and I've asked Dr. Blake to reach out to Central, and as soon as we get answers to some of those questions, we'll share it with you guys.
I think one of the questions was, how did this come about, right? Class size is about equity and access, right? So in 2022, Governor Hochul signed it into law, and there's a 5-year plan for reduction and meeting those full class size mandates. But what we do know is that going to be a bit of a challenge considering space in New York City specifically, right? So that's basically the genesis of this law, and it's based on the fact that there were and still continues to be some level of inequity in New York City and outside of the city, and how those communities function, right? So this law is basically saying that we want to reduce class size, so we can really positively impact student learning and student performance and outcomes. And that's essentially the genesis of this law. And I just wanted us to be mindful of where this is all coming from. And that's the basic understanding for me to communicate, I think, best as I can, where this is emerging from. It's basically a state law, and we're going to have to meet those targets. Now, within that, within the timeline for reaching all those targets, there are going to be exemptions, I'm certain of it. And there are going to be maybe some amendments to the law to ensure that, we can get these targets. I don't know if the city can really reach that in 5 years, moving that we're into, a multi-year approach as it is already. So, and to Vic's point, all those questions, most of them are outside the parameters of our scope, but I think the big thing that we can message to you is that we're working on it. I think the big challenge right now is, quite frankly, enrollment protocols, and really coming up with an understanding of how we're going to enroll students in 28 because of its unique design.
no, I definitely agree with you. Even all the research that we've all been in this committee doing, we see that a lot of questions can be answered by enrollment, which, enrollment, I'm I've been in touch with enrollment because I wanted to just reach out, and I know that they hold a lot of information. I will be working with them with this committee to have them at our next meeting because they couldn't make it to this meeting. They did want to attend to share the information that they have and the answers that they might be able to answer to our questions. It's just the date didn't align with their office and any representation, but next month we'll be aligned with them, and then that's how we'll like align that meeting because we want to get answers and solutions. And I don't know, I see Adriana's hand up. Is that hand up on purpose? Yeah. Did you want to say something?
I have two questions, if I may. I don't know if that is appropriate now. I don't mind holding them to the end and or emailing them, but if this is an appropriate time and or place, I would love to ask.
Well, it's up to Raj and Vic. Do you want us to ask the questions at the end? Or would you want to?
It doesn't
I'm
matter.
fine right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you both. Hi everyone, Adriana Alessia, resident of District 28, and currently PEP member representing Queen CECs. My first question I put in the Q&A. Raj, could you explain to any of us or tell us how we can support the superintendent's office in getting these admissions protocols over that you have requested? Like, can we email admissions just as concerned parents and say, recently we were let know that our district office has requested a number of documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that appropriate?
I think certainly communication is key, right? And we're gonna have to get to the outcomes that we want by really negotiating conversations, right? So I think by virtue of having enrollment become part of this team and visit and provide updates and guidance around next steps is extremely important. But I think as far as having and advocating for what District 28 needs and requires to be in compliance. I think really negotiating conversations about where we are with some of these issues, right? And expectations would take the conversation a little bit further. And by virtue of having this committee that's advocating, right, for compliance with the law and being a partner with enrollment and central office is the way to go. And I think I think you're on the right track, and we are getting support from some partners at Central with, with everything. It's just really a complicated, it is an adaptive challenge. It is not a technical one where we can sit down and say, let's do this, this, and this, and this, and it's fixed. It's
No,
very
I
complicated.
understand that, and I can
Yeah.
appreciate that, but an admissions protocol or protocols in general are set forth and like not as adaptive, right? If you're going to receive them from the central office, that means that they have them somewhere, but if they don't have them, then that may be the reason here. We could talk about that more offline though. My second question was, you said that District 28 was in compliance and / over the target rate set forth by the central office of 3%. And you mentioned something like 52, 57, something around there percent or not percent of individual classes. Is that what that is? So that's
Right.
individual classes like 1, 203 versus classes like the entirety of the 5th grade.
That is correct. They're happening in different schools and different grades.
So it's 50, how many is it?
Based on my last calculations, it was 53.
53. And how many of those are within the recommended like size of the class on purpose versus there were enough students to open up another class, but it would have been too many to put into, do you understand what I'm saying? Are these
think
purposeful reductions of the class, or are they happy accidents? Thank you.
When we say purposeful, we have to be I just want to message that we are not turning away any of our students, right, that are coming. If they come to admissions, they come to our building, we register them, and we provide a seat. So all of the leaders that in our district, they're mindful of the class size law and they're working on it. So when I say that we have about, let's say, 85 to 95 classes right now that are in compliance with class size mandates. They're happening in different places, and it's intentional. We're looking to see where we can find spaces to be in compliance, and hopefully that will trickle into next year as well, right? So for example, we may have leaders who say, listen, I'm going to start with kindergarten and slowly scale up, right? Because it's progressively going to allow for coherence across that campus. So in some cases, some of our leaders are starting with K, but some of our, schools may not necessarily have that capacity because of enrollment, right? Again, if a child comes into our building with an enrollment letter, we're going to seat them, right? And even if it means opening up another section, providing the funding is there, and it's very complicated, right? But to answer your question the best as I can, it is intentional, but we're also very respectful of what families coming to our communities, right? We take our children, and if it means capping at 32, we cap at 32.
Thanks, Raj.
You're welcome.
And like you said, this has been challenging, and that's why we're here to at least try to open up the committee to getting answers from different people in the district, whoever we can get different answers from. So maybe one person doesn't have all the answers. Maybe it's a conglomerate group of everybody. So
And Quentin, if I can just add to Adriana's earlier, the first question, I think going back to enrollment, if it's something that warrants sort of a roundtable in person, I don't know if that might be more beneficial, but I think the more people we can have together to work on these issues, the better it is. And sometimes maybe an in-person meeting helps that a bit along. So that's something we can arrange also with enrollment and our team.
Agreed.
I agree. Thanks, Vic. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that from the district. And our next up on our agenda is just an introduction to Catherine Zapata. She knows her title better than I do.
Thanks, Quentin. Thank you, all committee members for having me. And of course, to the D28 staff and all the parents and caregivers. I am Kat Zapata, the Director of Education to the Queensborough President Donovan Richards. I work in tandem with all the great stakeholders and education advocates we have here and making sure that I, myself, and the borough president are aware of the needs of the schools across the borough. We have been working closely with all districts, but we did hold a superintendent roundtable, so you all know, last week, where we actually met with Vic and Dr. Blake to discuss the needs of the district, and definitely start the conversation on class sizes. I do want to note that our office does not oversee anything that really has to do with class size. The borough president is supportive of the mandate, and anything on his end is advisory, given that there is a Department of Education and a central office. So we definitely take all inquiries seriously from parents, and would really encourage parent engagement and participation, and also outreach to our office. We host some amazing events, a monthly parent advisory board meeting. We had one on class size mandate in March, I believe, which was very successful, with central office to discuss the mandate itself and go through the year out initiative that they are doing. So maybe that's something that we need to host again, Quentin. I'm more than happy to elevate that concern internally to central office to see maybe there's something we can host at Borough Hall with parents, right? To talk about class sizes, given that this is a borough-wide issue. But also open to all suggestions from you all and really encourage a dialogue around this, given that it's our students at the end of the day, right, who are part of the district, and we want to see them shine across it. So I'll leave my email. Please always feel free to reach out. If you wish to be a part of our directory and newsletter, please also send me an email, and I'm always available to talk. So thank you all.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions for Kat, you could definitely put it in the Q&A, but she's also leaving her email there and her contact information, as she's just awesome like that. And her office has been a great support in many ways to our district. All right. But now I want to ask our committee members. This is our little time. Do any of you other fellows and gals on the committee have anything that you want to touch base on, something you might have learned or heard, or something that you want to mention?
Can I first start ask a question? Yeah. So recently I visited one of my liaison school, and they actually got some of the funding to support small size. And they did, make, I think, fifth grade, compliant, which was good. It actually done some wonder there. My question, because I talked to the principal, how that money was allocated and how to calculate, etc. I'm still confused, honestly, because if you understand the first student funding formula, it basically based on per student. So how they come up with the number of money, they to support this, and on what basis? Because most of the school I know that have most of their school funding allocated for the salary for the teacher. Beyond the salary of the teacher, there's very little room for the principal to move around funding. So yeah, that's my question, how that the funding part is calculated.
That's a good question. I'm glad we have that recorded. because we are going to submit that question unless anybody, I don't know. That's not a question I think Raj or Vic would have at this moment, correct?
Not
An answer.
necessarily, but from my understanding, the Department of Ed and Central have not released any funding to address class size. Our principals are very savvy with their budgets. So these two leaders may have been able to negotiate their budgets to make a hire, right? So one teacher, whatever the salaries for starting teachers are now, could, in theory, reduce four classes, right? So it's a possibility, right, that these two leaders that you're speaking of, and if you can shoot me an email, I can probably follow up with them to find out how they did that. But my guess is, and I know Bruce is going to chime in a second, they negotiated their funding streams to possibly hire, or they may have just negotiated the way some of our other schools are, but just getting really creative with programming. Go ahead, Bruce. I'm sorry.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So with I'm Bruce Zihal, UFT District Representative. My understanding is what Lou said, that the funding was based on a fair student funding formula. And just as Lou says, he doesn't understand it. Nobody understands why that formula was used. There was a 250 million sum of money that went out to schools specifically to reduce class size. What had happened during the spring is that some schools received this money based on the fair student funding formula, but it was done haphazardly. So you might get one school in the city that received $2,000, which I don't know what you're going to do with that to reduce class size. And another school may have received thousands of dollars more. So it is definitely something that needs to be looked at in terms of how the city, how the DOE issues funding to the schools to reduce class size so that the reduction in class size can be done effectively.
And just to piggyback on what Bruce is sharing, that is an area that should be addressed at some point, right? And maybe this committee can work on that as well, because in some cases, right, we have schools that have space to reduce a significant proportion of their student body. They just need the funding stream to hire 3 or 4 teachers to make the entire building in compliance. So as we're talking about class size and we're talking about enrollment, I think another aspect of the work is, when is the city going to release funding? Because as I mentioned earlier, it's complicated. Where are we going to get these young men and women from universities, right, or colleges to work and be prepared to service our children, right? So that's really complicated because if we open up a funding stream and we need a couple thousand teachers, where are we going to get them from, right? So that's another complicated aspect to the work. So it is, as I said, it's adaptive and challenging because enrollment is an issue, and to Bruce's point, the funding stream is an issue, and then we also have to think about human resources. Where are we going to secure these adults to service our children, right?
Yeah, good points. Any other one? That was a good, great group answer towards Lou. Anybody else have any? I can start calling y'all out.
I was wondering, Quentin, there are a couple of, not many, there are only 4 questions in our Q&A. And I was wondering if we
Go through
can
those.
check in, if we could read it. If you cannot answer it, that's okay. Then we can send it to you, and maybe you can try to get answers from someone else, but we know that it was hard for you. So, but if we can just read it, maybe.
No, we have to read it. We got to get this on record so we could always follow back and look at it. So this message was from Jessica Zillo. So if classes are being capped, then where are the kids going to go to school? More specifics on how this reduction is happening would be helpful. And that's a very, very good question. And that's why we got to like share these questions with enrollment, district planning, and also principals, because they have to like be the ones that like implementing these in their schools specifically. So that's a good question that's going to probably take that. But Bruce might have an answer to this. Let's go, Bruce.
So, the school communities will, I mean, the UFT is in full support of the school communities, like being the decision makers in terms of this, of how it's going to occur within each school. So that's what I would expect to be happening.
Yeah,
So
and
each school separately, each one will be different. It's not one size fits all. Each one will be
Correct.
going
Like
through.
each school will be looking at its own particular situation, determining what it needs to reduce class size and go from there.
but I think to Jessica's question around when we're capping, right? Let's say hypothetically we're capping sixth grade and 287 and 08, which are schools on the southern end of Queens. If all of the grades are filled, we're going to try to find locations, and this is happening at the district office also, right? So you're working with Central, and a members of our district team are working with families to overflow to spaces that would be comfortable, right? So we may overflow hypothetically to 217, which is Principal Burns' school, just to keep everybody in a space where the families are comfortable. But if they want to go in their space at 190 or 157, we always work with the families to see where they can that would serve them best. But typically what we do is that we find neighboring schools that has space, and then we will cap the grade, and the child and a parent will be provided a documentation to go to the other school because they have a seat there that's available for them. But that's basically the capping process right now. So if a section is closed or a grade is closed or a classroom is closed and it's at 32, we're going to try to overflow those children and families to a neighboring community that has space. And that's something we do on a regular. Today, several grades were capped. Classes were capped in different schools.
And this is all also keeping in mind transportation for the families and the convenience, right? That's a huge aspect.
That is always the first thing when we're working with families and overflowing. Transportation's always key, right? Especially for families that are in housing situations, makes it very complicated.
I can only imagine that definite. I can understand Jessica's question concerning that. Thank you for that. And Adriana, this is a question you asked already, correct? Can Raj explain if and how we can support the superintendent's office in getting the admissions protocols that they've requested? We went through that. But Jessica also had another question. Who is coming up with the additional space? The SCA or the principals?
As of right now, principals, all of our leaders, the ask was at the end spring of last year when this process became part of our work stream. We asked all of our leaders to start thinking about their programming, and to their credit, we have amazing leaders in District 28, as you know. They're very savvy, very intelligent about the work, and we were able to get to where we are right now because they were very creative with their programming of students. Again, I just want to be very mindful that we're not turning any of our children away. We register them and we get very creative with how we're going to program them for different sections and how we can get really savvy. In some cases with licenses, teacher license is another aspect of the work. Bruce could probably speak a little bit about that. You get savvy with teachers, especially if they have dual certification and all that stuff, becomes very helpful when you're seating children for classes.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And if any principals ever want to share that creative plan that how they've implemented it, I'd love to see that. You can definitely share it with the community. Feel free. Our next question from Adriana, can they explain SAMs, SAMs, and how they work? You're laughing.
Bruce, you want to take Sam? Sam is very complicated. It's funding stream. And there are very specific criteria that have to be met for the money to be used, for the funding to be used there. You'll have Title I, Title II, not Title I, Title III money. Those are typically the two. Title III primarily for L students and instructional purposes. So depending on the SAM allocation of funds, it gets really complicated. A lot of rules around a particular SAM. Bruce, you want to add anything? I'm sorry.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I don't know how, the SAM process is coming into the class size topic. Not sure that it will. What I'm hopeful for, and what the UFT is hopeful for, is that the schools, communities are going to get an opportunity to allow the DOE to know exactly what their needs are in terms of meeting the class size law. For some of our schools in our district, as Raj has mentioned, there's space. It might just be that the school needs a certain number of extra teachers to reduce the class size, which would mean they would need a certain amount of funding from the DOE. But other schools in our district don't have the space, which means something will need to be built. And the school community should be the ones that are getting together to talk about whether that means, can we build on top of the school? Can we build on the side of the school? Is there a location across the street from the school that the DOE can utilize the space in? Whatever it is that the school community comes up with and present to the DOE. That's how we hope things are going to play out.
Thank you. And Adriana put that she asked that question because a principal had told her that might be a way how funding for class size reduction could be distributed. So that's making that connection on how it could be related to class size, but we will see. All right,
Yeah.
and we have another question from Chair Heather Demetriadis. When you say available space, how do you define available space? For example, JHS 190 has a dance studio. Would you see that as available space?
Listen, I mean, dance studio depends on the programming, right? And what the community wants and what the principal and that body is offering, right? As somebody like Principal Grego, you'd have to look at his community and what they want to serve, how they want to service their children, right? If dance is part of the core curriculum, then that space is not going to probably be useful, right? So it's one of those things where when we're thinking about space, and the fact that it's not a classroom means it's going to be used, right? There are academic policies around how many art students need to receive, right? Credit or service minutes, right? So we are completely in compliance with all of that stuff. And if Principals Grego's school right now is offering dance, right, and it's part of the core curriculum, that space is not going to be used, right? So, and again, I think sometimes it seems easy to say that space can and can't be used because it's such a really complicated thing. But we visited a school a couple of days ago for a visit, and they have a dance room and a music room because they have a band, right? Those spaces are not going to be touched because that's part of the core curriculum. That's part of the school's services that they're offering children, right? So those spaces are not going to be transformed into instructional spaces. So when we're thinking about spaces, we're looking at almost any and everything that we can get, right, to use for instructional purposes without taking other things away that are extremely important, particularly the arts.
Okay. Bruce wants to add on that.
I agree with Raj. There should be no loss of programs to any school unless the school community, as they might naturally do, decide to change something, but not because of the class size law. That shouldn't occur. Any programs should remain. And when the UFT is talking about space, we're talking about space that actually exists now in schools. We have some empty classrooms in some schools. That is space.
Yeah. So, just for example, we visited a school a couple weeks ago, and we looked at spaces that are no longer being used because they were locker rooms, right? The old school days, there were locker rooms for children, but those spaces are not being used right now, right? So we were having conversations with folks about whether or not those spaces can be used. But again, it's very complicated because sprinklers and where the stuff is located and whether or not we can, really service the space in a very authentic way that is really reflective of a comfortable educational space for children is a question. So when I'm thinking also space, we're thinking really creatively around spaces that traditionally haven't been used for instructional purposes, particularly like locker rooms, right? In some schools, you'll still find showers where children used to be able to shower in these buildings. And how can we possibly transform some of those spaces into instructional spaces? And it's really interesting. Like I was at 99. I don't know how many of you have ever visited Principal Forza's annex. Very creative use of space there. And he explained that to me not too long ago, that it used to be a garage. And when you walk in there, it's just amazing what they've transformed it into. So those are kind of things we're thinking about too within District 28, where we can find opportunities to transform spaces into instructional spaces that traditionally have been used for other functions.
Thank you, Raj.
Welcome.
And just in case, I'm hoping that Principal Hazel wants to add to this question.
Good night, everyone. I am definitely excited to lean into this conversation, right? Because I think this is probably the first time I've been in a class size law meeting, and I'm really excited, and I hope to be able to come every time there's a meeting, because this particular law is really dear to my heart for a number of reasons. We know that the benefits it has for children, one, and we also know that in my case, I'm fortunate that we had a new addition to our school. So we have gained about 20 classrooms, including some offices. And so I have the space. I have the space to be able to implement it today. What I do not have is the funds. And that's the unfortunate thing, that you have a situation where our rooms are set up. With the new addition, most of the classes are within the new addition. We have a few in the existing building. Yes, there are some upgrades and so on taking place with the existing building. And through the advocate of a very great community, a lot of this is happening. And thank you to the district team as well. But this is an area where immediately tomorrow, if we had the funds, class size law could be implemented in this school, and this particular school, not because it's the school that I'm leading, but because it's a school where we have the space, we can get the staff. I have so many resumes. There are people that I've vetted already to take up positions. We have an amazing crew of substitute teachers, one of which I was able to hire. So we have quality staff as well within the school building. So our community is ready. And so I am hoping that we can continue the conversation to be able to have a model for what class size law can look like once implemented right in District 28.
Well, thank you for that prepared speech. No, I'm playing. But no, we really appreciate you sharing that information and insight about your school having that and just needing the funding. Just hopefully within our community, we can find where this funding is going to come from, and not just your school, but all the schools that need the funding to implement this class size law. Awesome. All right, and we have our last question from Jessica Zelo. So is this savvy programming for schools? So is this savvy programming for schools and class size supposed to be discussed at SLT? It's a great question. Anybody have something about that? Principal Hazel, is this something that you would discuss with your SLT? You're muted. You gotta. You can talk, like unmute.
Thank you once more. So this is something I can definitely continue the conversation with my SLT because it's a unique opportunity that we have our stakeholders who are represented. We have our parents who would love to see this implemented. We have staff, a part of it, and administration. Okay, so I think that we would continue the conversation. We already started thinking ahead about it with the new addition because we had a year to watch this beautiful building go up. And because it was accelerated and we are in the space now, we are like, okay, let's move on to the next phase. But the challenge again is the funding. And because we are not a Title I school, and so our metrics for the Galaxy and for budgeting, it's very tight. And last year I was able to close off a deficit as a first-year principal. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've handled budget at my prior school at a middle school. And so I find creative ways to ensure that we stay afloat, we thrive, and we experience the type of success that the school is used to and having had. We were able to go up 5 points with the type of, in mathematics, with the type of structures and accelerated learning that's taken place in the school. So it's a school that's producing. Imagine what we can do because we have classes with 32 and 31 students in it. And I'm talking, this is an elementary school. Imagine what we can do if this law is implemented.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Bruce, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think what Dr. Lewis just said is her school could be like an example for the state class size law in our district to see how it can be implemented well. And it sounds like Dr. Lewis is already engaged with our SLT and will continue to. And I would encourage, I think it would be wise of all SLTs to be discussing this issue. Remember, parents, the agenda is not just created by the principal. The agenda is developed by everyone on the SLT. And if the parents, or if the UFT, or if DC37, whoever is on the SLT, wants to talk about class size law and how to implement it in their school, they should ask for that to be on the agenda. But I would highly recommend, and I want to say it again, I would highly recommend that the SLTs in every school start these discussions about how their particular school can go about meeting the state class size law. It may be that they talk about that we have existing space, like Dr. Lewis's school, and we just need to hire a certain number of teachers. We'll figure out how many teachers would you need to ask the DOE for, right? So that money could be added to the budget. Other schools, it might be, like Raj was saying, well, maybe we can transform some space. All right, maybe we do have these spaces like the locker rooms that aren't being used for anything anymore. All right, and then we'll need, a school construction project to transform those classes. For other schools, it might be there's nothing we can do but put an addition somewhere on the school, right? And earlier in the meeting, the term exemptions was used. I think Raj brought that up too. Exemptions will come into play for the schools that do not have the space, can't transform everything, and need to build something. But the exemption doesn't mean that the school should just be allowed to flounder with high class sizes forever. There has to be a plan that's put in place that the DOE is going to say, this is how we're going to be able to legitimately get this school to meet the class size law the way that the community wants it to meet the class size law, not by sending schools across the district, sending students across the district or anything like that, or eliminating programs, not like anything like that.
Yeah, and just to add, our leaders are looking at almost any and everything, right? So I would encourage this team to probably reach out to Principal Forza, because next to his annex, and Vic and I have been working with connecting him with the city council to see about possibly purchasing a property next to his annex. And essentially what they would do is create and you'd have to see the space to understand it, but essentially the cafeteria, you open up a space and it just automatically connects to the building, so they can transform that building and have it become part of the annex, right? And you can automatically seat maybe 6 or 8 classrooms, and that would technically alleviate some of the pressure on the north side, right? So for example, if a school is in a neighboring area and they are at 32, some of those kids could eventually overflow to Principal Forza's school. But that's something we're talking about, talking to him with, I'm sorry, it's been a long night. We're communicating with him about possibly setting up times to meet with the city council, and our central partner is already aware of this, about possibly purchasing that space and making it part of the annex, so we can build more into that space, and that will alleviate class size. But that's something we're thinking about. We're really, like I said, we're thinking about any and everything and reaching out to our folks. And I know Vic has been trying to connect him with Representative Shulman's office.
Yeah, and this goes back again to the SAM allocations, which was, it's like several buckets: fair student funding, federal funding, state funding, local funding. And it's basically trying to allocate funding from all of those streams to get things done. And just touching back on the SLT, right? One of the reasons for the SLT is to improve student performance and outcomes. And a bucket within the SLT is resource allocation. And that's where principals usually discuss on the school community, school resources, budgeting, staffing, and also facility management. So having those discussions are important, but having this discussion this evening is supremely important, because it allows everybody to be transparent and kind of take this information and spread it, right? We need to get it out, especially to the elected officials. And I can speak personally to Kat, who's on this meeting. The QBP's office has been incredibly supportive of us, and Catherine. And I'd like to thank her again for that.
Thank you so much, Vic. So I also have a quick questions, So when earlier it was mentioned that the middle schools, like that you are trying to work with the space that you have. But in particular for the middle schools, we know that it's really tricky. Like we know about the the elementary schools, some of them do have space, and thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, for speaking. But realistically, how will we be able to tackle the middle school space issue? And is there like, what can we do to include the SEA so that we can either build annexes or identify space for the middle schools that is close by? Are there plans to because I know that SEA is not exactly fast in getting things done. Are there plans and yeah.
So we have message, right, with enrollment and our partners around class size at Central, right? Specifically around middle schools. And 157 is a really complicated space also, right? Which is at capacity, and it's a really complicated enrollment process, right? And it becomes very, I'd say the word complicated pretty often, but it's extremely complicated in how they're going to address that, right? Because you have, Principal Srirachi is here, but you have children that audition and they come in, right? And then you have neighboring kids, and then you have kids who are it's really challenging. But a school like, also 217, which is Principal Burns, right? He's on the south end, and that school is at 1,500, give or take, on any day. It goes out to 14 change. But that school is capped in many places, right? But we've messaged that, what are the goals, right? And I anticipate there may be exemptions for the middle schools until they can come up with a game plan. But we have articulated the need, particularly for space, right? Building new spaces and where there are opportunities. So I know the old funeral home on Hillside was purchased, and they're building something there. But I think that's for high school, right? But we have to start thinking about the middle school too. But that's something we have messaged. I am not certain what their stance are on that. But as of right now, we have messaged that the middle schools are going to be extremely difficult. 190 is also at capacity, both north and south. We have a little bit more flexibility with 08 and 287, but they're still having a lot of numbers, right, of children enrolling. So it's complicated, but I do anticipate at some point the conversation will have to be had around building facilities at some point, I think.
Yeah, and Simone, if I could just add, this is something Raj, like, in order to identify those spaces, you really have to physically go there and look at them. And that's something Raj leads from our team. I'll give you an example though, like the school I came from at 54, they had a couple of spaces, but to get those spaces, they needed to do asbestos abatement, and that took almost a year. So going back to your point about getting the SCA to move a little faster and some of these things will help. But yeah, I think it's an individual use case with a lot of schools. Some of the schools are much older, right? The spaces have to be modified significantly more than some of the newer schools. So those are all things we have to keep in mind.
Great points. Great points.
Quick, just a
Yeah, go ahead.
very quick. Would it be helpful, or could we parents also be helpful with that when we see like an empty school building? There's one in my neighborhood. There's an empty school building from a parochial school. To share that with you, or there are lots of new buildings, big new buildings with community space. Is that something that we can share with you? Because if we as parents from our district all work together and we see something that we think might be appropriate, if we let you know, would that be helpful, or does that make sense at all?
Were you directing that to us from the district team?
Yeah,
You can certainly do that. I think, quite honestly, this body we have a lot of different stakeholders here. And to Vic's point, having conversation with our elected officials around some of those spaces and what they can do, because there's only so much a district office can do. We can identify the space after you share it with us and share that information with SEA, but it's going to require a really complicated approach to getting that space. Like I think with Principal Forza specifically, it might be more accessible because the building is right next to his excuse me, his annex, right? And it's just essentially cutting a hole in two different buildings and just making a connection, right? But for that space to be purchased and utilized, it's going to require a really complicated negotiation between our elected officials, schools construction, and the surrounding stakeholders, right, in the community, and how that space is going to be transformed. So certainly, yes, I think as a community, as a team here, securing that information, sharing it with us, and then negotiating relationships with our elected officials so they can then do some of the work for us. Like, Catherine is here on this call, and all the folks that are representing elected officials. This could be the space for that to start happening. And that's why I mentioned possibly reaching out and connecting with Principal Forza or inviting him to your next meeting to see where he is with that particular ask, which is to purchase that space. And as I said, Vic and I are going to do our best to connect it with our elected officials to make that request. But if we work as a body right here, right now, in supporting him, I think that would add a lot of leverage to securing that space.
thank you.
Thank you. I know Catherine she put it in the chat, but I think she was going to say it. But were you going to say it, Kat?
Yes, Simone, please feel free to share those spaces with us. And as what was reiterated, definitely takes a collective effort. So I encourage all parents on this call, if there's a space that you all, see empty, please feel free, to ping us over here at our office or include us in an email as well.
Awesome. I just want to take this time to ask the Spanish interpreter if there's any questions on that side.
Sure. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta en línea? No questions in the line. Spanish.
No problem. Next time.
Thank you.
It's all right. Well, no, we had a lot of conversations, and we have a lot more to come back with. And I just want to just remind people that our next CEC meeting in District 28 is November 7th, and enrollment will be there. So a lot of these questions, we're just going to now just transfer to that meeting, and we'll still, update class size committee, but can't just have them in our meeting and not ask them these questions. They're going to be right there. We could grab them. So I look forward to that meeting as well, and we could continue some of these questions and asking them directly, probably in advance, so they could be better prepared.
Quentin, also, I think we should remind people our town hall for middle school and high school admission. For middle school, we will have a town hall on November 4th, right? November 4th, Monday, and that's before our next CC meeting, and we will have our high school admission town hall November 12th, Tuesday. So there will be a lot of middle school principals or representative be there, answer questions, try to explain to people their school, stuff like that. Hope you guys can join and help us to promote it in your community. Thank you.
Yes, please spend the week with us. We got some good stuff coming up. Are you about to say something, Vic?
Oh, no, I was just to follow up on Lou. We are going to remind all the middle school principals if they could send some representatives there. And I was going to say, well done to you and the team on this meeting.
No problem. And just to close, I just want to get Christina's question. She asks, what is the next target if the current is 3% now? What is next? I don't know if we have an answer, but Raj,
We have no
no,
idea.
we have
We,
no
we,
idea.
we probably will have some information in the spring, and if you keep inviting Vic and us to this these meetings, we'll attend, and we'll keep you updated. As of right now, we're anticipating early spring, some of that information being shared with us, and certainly we'll communicate it to you.
Great. No, we look forward to that. Hey, we're just trying to get as many answers as we can, and this is the committee for that. And we're at 9:16, so I'm looking forward to closing this meeting. Is there anybody that wants to say any last words? All right. So, oh, you about to say something, Tanya?
I was
Tanya?
just going to say thank you, everybody, for joining. It's much appreciated if the Spanish interpreters could stay on the line before we close it out. Thank you.
Yes. So, good night, everyone. Thanks again for
You're
coming.
welcome.
We'll keep you
Gracias
updated.
por venir. Los mantenemos actualizados.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Gracias a todos. Buenas noches.
Good night. Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Few more people, maybe one more individual to go. I will go ahead and let's remove everybody. Let me see.